Everybody, thanks for watching. So real quick, we're going to get into this video real fast and talk about what I was saying in the video about the Persians being created and the Arabs being created. So it's something you guys, heard me say, and I talked about a lot of times before, but we've seen the backlash from the live. A lot of people had questions. I got a lot of emails about that. So what I want to do is make sure I go through this, even though I have videos on this, but it's an important thing to understand exactly what I'm saying about this, because it's going to give you a lot of insight into history of what's going on. So understand, the ruling elite want to make sure that they are not the ones being, outed as the problems behind what's taking place with war. So you're going to have, as we see with the Vatican, we see with Rome, we see with these leaders using other weapons to basically conquer. So as I said in the video, the Persians was a creation, right? Just like the Arabs. So if you go and look, you'll see how the Aryans came into the Indus Valley and basically made it with the people in that area. So they call them Indo-Iranians, right? But the Iranians before Aryans came and mixed in, of course, were dark skinned. So if you look at it on the map, you have Africa and you have Iran, right? Which would be considered part of the Middle East. And then after that, you would have the Indus Valley going into India. So history would tell you everybody along that way was obviously dark skinned. So when you have the Aryans come in, they had to mix in with somebody, right? Because white can only make white. And we know the Persians are not white. So they are classified by America as being white. Obviously, they are a mixed race, right? So we're going to get into this because it's going to really open up a lot of understanding into what's happening and what took place in that history. Okay, so with the Persians, right, you have the Persian Empire, and they just basically came out of nowhere when you pay attention. So we understand how the Aryans came down, mixed in with the people of the Indus Valley and in India, and this is where we get the whole history of Hinduism or what have you, which the Aryans claim they created. So we have all this taking place, and then we have what's happening in Kemet, right? So you have the Greeks living with the ancient Egyptians, and the Greeks wanting to rule Egypt. Now, as I always talk about, they can't just come into Kemet and conquer Kemet because you have Greek citizens there, right? The Greeks wouldn't have it. So they had to find a way to basically infiltrate Egypt and conquer. And this is basically what they did when they created the Persians. So the Persian Empire was created. They was basically bred and trained by the Greeks. And again, you have that connection with Alexander and the Persians. So why is it that Alexander has this connection with the Persians? And we see once Alexander took over in the 4th century, they was basically calling him, even though he married into the Persian Empire, but they was already looking for him to be the ruler of the Persian Empire. But understand, it's already before this, as I talked about in the previous video, showing the context between Xerxes and Alexander, which Xerxes, in a letter that we actually have, was claiming to be related to Alexander. So that's a whole other thing. We'll get into that. My whole issue is I want people to understand this creation and what was it meant for. So the Persians basically getting the keys to the kingdom, understanding how Egypt worked. This is how Egypt was conquered because the Greeks gave them that information. And as I always say, why didn't the Greeks give the Egyptian empire back to the Egyptians after they conquered the Persians, right? So something to look at, something to understand. It's not so much that the Persians amassed this, great power and was just smarter because they're newer. The Egyptians was ruling for thousands of years. How did this new civilization of people basically come up, gain power, gain the control and understanding that they had during that time to rival the ancient Egyptians, come into Kemet and conquer Kemet and rule it for so long from the ancient Egyptians? They had to have some inside knowledge to do this. And then on top of that, how did the Greeks easily defeat the Persians if the Persians defeated the ancient Egyptians? It don't make sense. So it also don't make sense that the Egyptians, when the Persian War was happening with the Greeks, that the Egyptian people didn't intervene and basically try to get their land back, because you would think they would join with the Greeks to fight the Persians with the understanding that they would get their land back, which that did not happen. The Greeks kept it and conquered it for a long time, right?
So it says here, according to Herodotus, another motivation that solidified Cambyses'
and it gets pronounced that different ways, expedition into Egypt was Phanes of Halicarnassus, originally a councilman and advisor to Amasis. An unknown course of events led to bitterness developing between them to the point that Amasis sent an Egyptian eunuch after Phanes, which a eunuch is a castrated Egyptian, right? That they basically, if you've seen Game of Thrones, you know what I'm talking about. They castrated these guys for many different reasons, and they was basically warriors that went out and did the dirty work. They was assassins. So a eunuch is basically a castrated person. So Amasis sent an Egyptian eunuch after Phanes, pursuing him to Lydia. Phanes was captured in Lycia, but outwitted his guards by getting them drunk and escaped to Persia, and assisted the Persian king in all manners of strategy, and was instrumental in shaping his resolve for conquest of Egypt. Now, I've been saying this for a long time. I've been telling you guys what I've been saying, that the Greeks gave the Persians the keys to the back door. This is what I'm talking about. Despite having full control over the Neo-Babylonian Empire and its sub-regions, including northern Arabia, Cambyses sent a message to the king of Arabia requesting safe passage through the desert road from Gaza to Pelusium. The Arabian king himself, an enemy of Amasis, and glad to facilitate his destruction, granted safe passage to Cambyses and even supplied him with troops. According to Polybus, even with all the precautions taken on entering the border of Egypt, only the city of Gaza resisted the Persians, which fell after a long siege. When the news of the impending battle reached Egypt, Psamtik III, son and heir of Amasis II, gathered the Egyptian army, stationing it along the fork of the Red Sea and the River Nile. Amasis himself had died 6 months before Cambyses reached Egypt. Psamtik had hoped that Egypt would be able to withstand the threat of the Persian attack by an alliance with the Greeks, but this hope failed, as the Cypriot towns and the tyrant Polycrates of Samos, who possessed a large fleet, now preferred to join the Persians. That one of Egypt's most prominent tactical advisors, Phanes of Halicarnassus, had already gone over to the Persian side, meant that Psamtik was entirely dependent on his own limited military experience. Polycrates sent 40 triarmies to the Persians. Psamtik, in a violent act of revenge prior to the confrontation with the Persian army, arrested all the sons of Phanes and stilled them between two bulls. He then cut them one by one, draining their blood and mixing it with wine. Psamtik then drank of it and made every other councilman drink their blood before the battles. Again, people, I've been telling y'all, the Greeks gave the Persians the keys to the back door to conquer the ancient Egyptians. No matter how you want to slice it, that's what happened. This is what you got to understand. One, they created these people to infiltrate Kemet, so they won't be named as the people who took down Kemet, because then we would know then who the real enemy is. So just like we have today with the Arabs, which again, the Arabs is the same as the Persians. They was basically bred to do what they did. So the Arabs was basically bred to take down the Persian Empire. Remember, the Persians was promised a lot of land once the Greeks took power. They didn't get it. So when Rome came and took power from, the Greeks after the whole Greco-Roman era, there was a deal that was supposed to be done with the Persians that didn't get done because Rome double-crossed them, which is why we had this whole war with the Persians and Rome, which lasted for a while. But in the meantime, the Arabs was basically being bred and created and trained, and they went out, and their job during the beginning was to basically go into African territories and conquer and enslave those people, which is what they did. All right, so it says in Persian history, Alexander is viewed in various ways, including as a destroyer, but also as a legitimate heir to the Persian throne in some narratives. He is even included in the Shamanaya, Persian's historical epic, as a figure of importance, right? So the Persians eventually absorbed Alexander into their national identity, sometimes attributing mythical origins and stories to him. He is depicted as a figure who explored the world in search of the fountain of youth in some accounts, right? Alexander sought to legitimize his rule by incorporating Persian practices and figures, such as marrying a Persian princess and promoting Persians within his administration. His conquest led the foundation for a Hellenistic world, which included the eastern territories he conquered, eventually ruled by the Seleucid dynasty. So you gotta understand, the Persians were basically created, as I said, to infiltrate in Kemet. And then we have this whole rule of the Persian rule in Kemet, which we know a civil war broke out that I talked about with Herodotus, broke this whole civil war down because it's something that the Greeks had basically talked about, had basically put in their histories, Herodotus at least. So this is going to help the Black Hebrew Israelites understand where the context comes from, where all this comes in at. Because the whole thing is, we know the ancient Egyptians was Black. We know the people in this area were all Black, and they're trying to figure out, how did this thing happen? When did the spread occur? So you have to then look at the Persian Empire and look at the conquest that happened in Kemet and understand that this was a setup from the beginning. Now, I talked about when you had the Greco-Roman era, when you had the Greeks and the Romans creating gods for the ancient Egyptians to worship, right? All right, so for the Hebrew Israelites, the Black Hebrew Israelites, this is important to understand when you're going into looking up that whole history of what happened with Kemet. Because as I said, remember, they want to talk about how the Jews migrated over, right? And how somehow the Persian Empire skipped over these people. I talked about this in my last video. It don't make sense for the Persians to be on a conquest of Kemet. No way they're going to go towards Kemet and miss over 1 million Jews. It's no way. So again, I broke that whole thing down with the Cyrus cylinder and how it does not say anything about Hebrews or Jews. It never mentions Hebrews or Jews. It's basically talking about anybody, right? So anybody could have basically been implicated in what the Cyrus cylinder is saying about people being able to return home, because there was a lot going on in Persia around this time as well. None of it pertaining to the Jews, which is why they wasn't mentioned. You got to understand, these people was created for that reason, to basically go in and take Kemet from the Egyptians, right? And what happened later, as I said, Alexander, he married, and then eventually he dies, and then they basically assume control of Kemet, never giving it back to the Egyptian people, right? So again, as I said, I showed you guys where Serapis comes in, where the Greeks and Romans created Serapis to basically, indoctrinate the people. And he is found in Rome as well. So we see this whole thing. Then we have now the Arabs being used, because once Rome is established, right, it's on already. They're already going out. They're conquering African lands, right? And then now Rome has to go into these other African lands, these other parts of Northern Africa and what's considered the Middle East. They need another army to do it. The Persians learned their lesson. They are no longer fucking with these people, right? So now we need the Arabs to come in. The Arabs take out the Persians, right? And then now the Arabs are going to come in and clean up and do what the Persians used to do, which is what they did. We talk about that over 1,000 years of slavery under the Arab Empire, right? So the Arabs come in, they enslave these Africans and take these African lands from Black people, from Africans, and then Rome ends up with it, which is why, again, we look at the whole Roman conquest map. We see Northern Africa, we see all these lands. This would include going all the way over to Morocco and seeing what happened there and how Morocco basically became, what it was for the Moors. So it's the same thing. So Persian people don't like to be called Arabs. Arab people don't like to be called Persians for that reason. And so you got to understand, like, these people are a mixture. As I said before, white people, U.S. Census, classifies everybody in Northern Africa, including the Black people, as being white. You can look it up. I showed you guys. Here it is right here. You can see it. They classify these people as being white, including the Persians, for a reason. So it says here, while Persians may be categorized as white in some contexts, like the U.S. Census, this is a broad racial category that doesn't necessarily reflect their distinct ethnic identity and mixed ancestry, right? In conclusion, Persians are an ethnic group with a distinct cultural identity, but they also have a mixed ancestry due to a history of migrations and interactions with other groups in the region. The concept of mixed race, as understood in some contexts, especially in the US, may not accurately apply to the complex history and identity of Persians. So what does all that mean? It don't fucking matter. It just means that they mixed, right? That's all you have to worry about. They're mixed. That mean Aryans came down, bred with somebody to create these people. They are trained by the Greeks, right? People are coming in there training and developing this civilization. There's no way a civilization can amass that much power and wealth without any help under the nose of the Romans and Greeks, unless there was a part of the plan, which that was the case. So as I said, they came in, conquered, they got the keys to the back door from the Greeks, and they did what they did, right? So this is important understanding that whole mixture of how the Persians are involved with the Jews and why that whole thing even exists, because you have to basically account for how did this large army of Persians get to Kemet, somehow get around the Hebrews and conquer Egypt and not have to deal with any Hebrews at all, which Herodotus attests to this whole civil war between the Egyptians and the Persians. Never once does he mention any Jews because they didn't exist during this time. So it's important to understand this. Then we go back to what I was saying about how Serapis Christos was created. These people was indoctrinated. They were sent out to go and spread this whole doctrine of the so-called Jewish faith, which it was something completely different during that time. And this is why we have everybody saying the Igbo and all these other tribes, African tribes, were Jews, and they themselves claiming to be Jews because blacks, Africans were sent out to spread this doctrine, and they did. This is why the older paintings show them as being black and everything like that. This is what you got to understand. So it's not as if these people are the biblical Jews. We never found anything pertaining to biblical Jews. Why is it that we have Persian artifacts from that time frame when the, Israelites are supposed to have been marching and everything like that? Why is it that we have that? Why is it that we have ancient Egyptian artifacts? Why is it that we have Aryan artifacts? We have everybody's artifacts from that time involved in all this, except for the Jews, because these people didn't exist. So it's something you got to understand and looking at this whole thing. So I know when I was talking about this before, a lot of people had shit to say. A lot of people didn't believe it. But this is the history you got to look at. And it's easy because clearly the Persians and the Arabs are a mixed people created for that reason, right? Who had the longest slave trade of African people, longer than the Europeans? The Arabs, for a reason, right? Who came into Spain and conquered Spain, took it away from the real Moors, and then stole their identity, which now when you look up Moors, you see Arab Moors. I broke that whole thing down. That was done under the orders of Rome, commanding these Arabs to go over there and do exactly what they did, because they can't have these black people, these Africans, seeing a white face come and conquer. You don't see the white people until after the conquest is done by the Arabs, right? So how is it you have Arabs basically coming to Kemet, and then all of a sudden, well, let's go Persians first. You have Persians coming to Kemet. Now white people run it, right? You have Arabs coming to Spain. Now white people run it. Think about that. They can't be in the Middle East. They can't survive there. They can't survive in Egypt. So who they let come in there? The Arabs, who they control. I mean, you got to understand, but behind the shadows, behind the scenes, they're running everything, just like we see with the Jews. They are running everything, right? So this is what you got to understand, what's taking place. So we have today, how are we going to get these people to give up their freedoms? We're going to have terrorism. We're going to use these people we created and create terrorism and terrorist attacks and blame it on these brown people, right? So this way we can steal the liberties away from you guys, blame it on these Arabs and blame it on these groups that we created called Al-Qaeda and what have you. And boom, you see what's happening. They're doing the same thing in Africa by using Africans to do so because they don't have nobody else. They're using refugees. They're using these rebels to go in and basically do their dirty work. And they've been doing this for centuries. It's the same MO. So, as I said, I understand people saying that the Hebrews was black. There's no way around Deuteronomy 28, speaking specifically to African Americans, black people, clear as day. Now, the thing is, you guys are believing that the history that you're finding that's, first century AD and what have you on up, you believe that that is ancient, and because we can find these African tribes claiming to be Jews so long ago, that somehow gives validity to, the Bible. And it doesn't, because we can't find these people during the time we should find them, which is around the time when everything was going on. So again, we go back into proven history. And in proven history, when we go and look at that, we only see conquest from the Greeks. We see conquest from the Persians. We see conquest from the Romans, right? We don't see no conquest. Who did these Hebrew Israelites conquer? Only the people in the fictitious Bible, right? And then again, you go and find out that these people, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Perishites, right? The Hivites, all these people are from the line of Ham, which would be the progenitor of the African race, right? So they're telling you exactly what they did, that we went out and conquered African lands, African tribes. But it's not the Jews that did that. It's the Greeks. It's the Romans. No history that the Jews had anything to do with the conquering of, any type of tribe that we see in the Bible. The Amorites, the Girgashites, the Perishites, the Hivites. There's no history of that. There's no proven history of that. Only biblical history. So if these people went out and conquered these lands that we read in the Bible, first of all, who are these people? Who are the Jebusites? We never found the fucking Jebusites. Like, who are these people? Who are the Amorites? Who are the Girgashites? Who are the Hivites? Who are the Perishites? Right? These are all biblical tribes that go back to African people, which is basically another name for African tribes that really actually existed and was conquered by these people, the Greeks, not the biblical Jews. So again, this is stuff I talked about before. I got into all this. I want to make sure this information is going up because I know there's a lot of people that got questions about this. A lot of people still tied up in the whole Hebrew Israelite doctrine. So I want to make sure I completely cover this because there's a lot of mix up in this whole timeline as far as, how did this stuff come to be and who did what? And it don't make sense because you can't figure out who was in this area during that time. And they want you to believe it was these people called the Jews when there's no proof of that. So the mystery question is, where did the doctrine come from, if not the oral tradition of the Hebrews? And that's where it came from. Again, we have the Septuagint Greek basically given to us by, I always talk about Ptolemy II Philadelphus, and that being the first written Torah that we know of, which the Septuagint is going to include those, the Tanakh. So that's how it got out. So you got to look at that and think about how would we even get this doctrine before this? And another thing is, these people are supposed to be scattered and, running from the Egyptians, and somehow they kept this oral Torah, which we can't prove ever even, existed or was created in the first place. So it's just something to think about. So it makes more sense that this was a created doctrine to be instilled on the people of Northern Africa for them to go out and spread this doctrine, which is what they did. And it changed over time until it became a more established religion that they could control. And then once Rome took power, Rome rolled the whole thing over into the New Testament and the creation of Christianity, changing Serapis Christos into Jesus Christ, which we know before they tried to do with the creation of Serapis Christos and getting Black Africans to worship Serapis Christos, which would be a god in the image of white men. How is that any different from what we see with Jesus Christ? So again, I read this whole thing to you. You guys can read it here yourselves, as it say down here that there were old gods and new gods was introduced. So that's what's leading to the disconnect right there. Them not understanding where this whole doctrine comes from and believing the mystery of it is somehow validity for the Old Testament and the whole Hebrew doctrine when it's not, because there's no proof. This is what you got to look for. You have to look at that whole thing. Where did the Persians come from? How did the Persians get this assignment to go and conquer and everything like that? What was the whole reason behind the Greeks even wanting Kemet in the first place, right? I mean, there's more to it, right? It's just like it don't fit. It would make more sense if the Jews conquered Kemet. Think about it. So you have this whole conquest. This is why Israel is the big deal, and it's the Holy Land and everything like that. It ain't shit in Israel. It don't make sense to me. Why is Israel a Holy Land? What's there? You got Tel Aviv. What else is there? You have a beach. There's nothing there. Like, what is more important? Kemet, ancient Kemet, and what's there, or Israel? It don't make sense. So what is it about that land? Why is it if you have God backing you, the power of God? First of all, one, these people already enslaved you, supposedly enslaved you, the ancient Egyptians. Why wouldn't God give them the power to go in and conquer Kemet, knowing that all of the power, the secrets, everything that we are basically dealing with today is coming out of Kemet? Yet these people didn't conquer it, right? They didn't conquer it. So, I mean, in real life they did, but not biblically. So it's just something to look at, something to think about as far as how the doctrine spread. This has to do with conquest. This has to do with Rome conquering the Greeks, and Rome basically piggybacking off of the Old Testament, giving us the New Testament and using it to establish their religious domination over the surrounding areas, which is what they did in Europe, in Africa, or what have you. And this is how we get what we have today. How is it that we had the Old Testament first, then you have the fall of the Greek Empire, the rise of Rome, and then basically Judaism is scattered. It's really no more. It's Rome is the power. Christianity is the power. Christianity is spreading. Meanwhile, Judaism is dying out, but God is allowing this to happen. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit. More so, it fits with Rome changing everything up, creating their own doctrine to go and conquer and have conquest. Everybody knows this. This is one of the reasons why the Jews or the Black Hebrew Israelites don't want to believe in the Bible and say that King James gave them a better version, because they know it was corrupted by Rome. But what you know about the Bible was given to you by Rome anyway. So unless you was reading a ancient Hebrew manuscript, you know exactly what the Hebrew manuscripts say, but you don't know what the original Hebrew manuscripts say, because we don't have the originals. We have what was created in the 11th century with the Masoretic text. We don't have anything before that. We have the Dead Sea Scrolls and many different languages, but the Dead Sea Scrolls have never been proven to match up with the King James Version. They say it do, but we don't have them. And as I said before, the ones that's in museums today have been proven to be frauds. So we don't know. We're not going to know. But you have to look at this whole thing and understand that these people were created to do exactly what they did: infiltrate and control. This has been happening down the line. So once that happened, what did the Romans do? They sent their people into Northern Africa, mixed in with those people. Now they control Northern Africa. They took control of it, calling it, everything below there sub-Saharan. Now they run North Africa. They have all these mixed race people in there, where the culture and history and the major accomplishments we find in North Africa, they are now trying to take control of and say Northern Africa was always white, when we know African people lived there, as I broke down and proved that whole thing. So it's a lot to get into with this whole situation. I just wanted to make this video real quick and basically get you guys into the understanding of what I was talking about when I was saying the Persians, basically was created, and the Arabs was created. A lot of emails about that. People seen the video, people watched the live, and I got into that a little bit. But I wanted to touch on that a little bit so you guys can see. Also, you can check out some of these videos, and I'll go into it a lot more deeper. You got no questions, do you?
No, I have no questions.
Good to go. So I'm going to get out of here real quick, man. And thank you guys for taking the time to watch. Merkabah Scholar Society members, make sure you guys check your emails. The app is out. You guys can go ahead and request. Make sure you guys request membership before you log in, so I can go ahead and improve everybody who's supposed to be on there. The app is only for Merkabah Scholar Society members. All links are in the description for people who are still trying to join. The course for Shopify, Amazon, link is in the description. It's still available. Make sure you guys grab that before the price goes up. And I got into that. We're going to get into that a lot more. And thanks for watching. See you guys next video. Peace.